Hey guys, welcome back. So today we are working on this Husqvarna snowblower. This machine comes to us from a subscriber, Kurt, who actually got this from his place of work. He said it last ran 6 years ago, but hasn't run since. Visually, this machine looks to be in great shape, but the more I look at it, the more problems I see. And we have one big problem, which is the Tecumseh engine. It is locked up solid, and without an engine, it doesn't matter how good the rest of the machine is. We're not going to be able to put it to work. So, it is the right time of year to fix a snowblower, and we have a good couple months to do it before the season's over. So let's get this one off the trailer. We'll get it up on the lift, take a closer look, and with any luck, we'll get this engine back up and running again. All right, so now that it's in here, we can kind of get a better look at what's going on. The machine, again, visually looks good on first sight, but there are some obvious issues. The big one being the engine. It does not rotate at all. So that is a pretty big issue. Assuming we work through that, we're going to have our hands full because a lot of these controls don't seem to work. This right here is to angle the chute up and down. And although the lever works, the chute doesn't move. Same thing here. This turns it left and right, but we don't get any motion at all. And the drive system, forward and reverse, seems to be locked up. So these three controls are pretty much no good as they are. The triggers do seem to work, as well as the drive and auger. So not everything is messed up. But even the engagement here, this rod is bent pretty bad. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be straight. So we have a lot of issues with the controls. We also have a worn out skid shoe over there. And actually the headlight, I noticed, was just hanging out with a broken bulb. So yeah, lots of little things to fix. But the big thing here is the engine. So I don't know if it ran out of oil. Is it the engine that's locked up, or is there something else preventing the engine from rotating? So let's start with the oil. Let's make sure we didn't run out and go from there. And I have fixed quite a few blown up engines, but usually they're Briggs or Honda clones. I don't think I've ever had a Tecumseh with a blown or locked up engine, but yeah, this would appear that it didn't run out of oil. Let's just double check the level. Yeah, if anything, it is overfilled. But it does not smell like fuel, so it's not contaminated. I think it's just a matter of someone put a little too much oil in there, which is probably better than not enough. And the oil color actually looks really good. So I'm not sure if that was added after the engine locked up. I'm not sure. But the oil seems to check out. So I think next we'll get this plastic cover off. This will give us access to the belts and the crankshaft. So if we're really lucky, maybe one of the belts will let go and just got wrapped around everything, preventing that engine from rotating. That was already loose. So these belts look fine. This one is loose, which is fine. There's a tensioner that tightens up, and this belt is tight. but nothing feels out of place there. So if we try to rotate the engine in the normal direction of travel, it does not move. Let's try backwards. And yeah, actually it does rotate backwards. Ooh. Yeah, that doesn't sound good. Actually, I can rotate it one way, but not the other. And even if I back it up, well, now it won't do that either. Okay, we're going forwards. Yeah, something sounds very wrong kind of in the engine area. So I'm not sure if it's internal or if it's more by the flywheel. But the fact that it moves at all is a good sign. So let's get the starter recoil and the blower housing off. You know, if we're lucky, it's an external problem rather, you know, something inside the engine. I think I feel compression. Either that or the engine's tight. Yeah, something. Doesn't sound good. Yeah, I almost wonder if it's the electric start. You know, there's definitely a lot of noise coming from the engine. I just can't tell if it's internal or external. But we do have compression. So that is a very good sign. So I think we do need to dig quite a bit deeper here. So I would like to get the spark plug out. You know, maybe we can do that now. Just get a look in there with the borescope, make sure we don't see anything bad. And if that checks out, then, you know, I would like to get the blower housing off just to make sure we don't have something hanging up the engine external from rotating. But the fact that we have compression is pretty good. You know, it tells me the connecting rod is good, the cylinder's good, the valves are good. So likely it's an external problem instead of a blown up engine. All right, we got a Bosch spark plug. Looks a little small for this engine, so I'm not sure if it's the right plug, but we'll double check that later. Let's get the borescope down there, see if we can see anything. All right, we'll have a look. Yeah, I'm not sure how much we're going to see because the cylinder isn't directly above the spark plug hole on a flathead. So we can actually just get a glimpse of the valves there, which actually look pretty good. And if I tilt over, that is the piston and the cylinder. So it looks good, although I say that. Looks like we might have some scoring. Let me switch to the side camera, see if I can get a better look at that. So with the side camera, we're facing the cylinder side. And yeah, it really doesn't look that bad. You can see the piston to your left, the cylinder just above that. Yeah, it looks like there is some light scoring on the cylinder, but nothing terrible. And no chunks of metal or anything floating around in the combustion chamber. So Yeah, I think whatever is going on, it's not in the top end. You know, if I didn't know it was locked up, I would say let's just start it. But I want to proceed carefully here because something locked this up solid. And I don't want to cause any more damage than what's already been done. So yeah, I'm going to get this stuff off. I want to get a look at, you know, the flywheel area and just see if there's anything there potentially that could have been causing the engine to lock. So what do you think? Do we have 6-year-old fuel? Yeah. There is some old fuel down there. So let's get that out. At least as much of it as we can. I think it's just these 2 bolts on the top holding the tank on. So we'll drain the tank, get the tank out of the way, and continue on. And there's the fuel that was in it. So I'm assuming this is probably 6 years old, if not a little bit older. So it's definitely turned bad and got some water in there as well. And the fuel valve was left on, so as if there was any doubt, we're going to have to clean the carb. So we've got 2 1/4-inch bolts here on the side. They're actually shoulder bolts. 2 more on the top, and I think this plastic piece will come out. So we're kind of free. This piece here won't actually pull over the plug for the electric start. There we go. And we might as well pull this piece as well. So I think we do need to remove the choke knob. There's 1 bolt here, 2 screws there, and might be something on the far side as well. And there's going to be a few wires connected to the switch, or at least 1 wire. So I'm not sure, yeah, I think it will unplug. Well, definitely from there, although that's not going to help us too much. So I think the easiest thing here is just to remove this bolt, and we'll leave the switch behind, but remove the tin. So choke is not locked up. Throttle plate's not locked up either. So there is, I think, 2 bolts right here we need to remove because this throttle assembly, it's actually attached to the blower housing. So we need to separate that. Interesting. That starter is moving. So that could have something to do with the engine locking up. Yeah, I'm not sure if they were using the electric start. Yeah, Kurt said the last time it ran, it didn't sound good. And it wasn't clear to me if it locked up when running or after it was shut down due to the strange noises. But that is not normal. Yeah, I think this is the last bolt, so once this is removed, we can get the blower housing off. Get a better look at that starter. This is just the connection for the primer. Primer is attached to the blower housing, so we have to disconnect it from the carb. And theoretically, that should be it. Nope, not quite yet. We need to disconnect this linkage. It's in the way. There's definitely some clues here. Got a few pieces of metal. They actually look like teeth. Maybe from that starter. And yeah, look at that. The starter has pretty much every single tooth broken off for whatever reason. And if we rotate the flywheel around, I think the reason why the engine was hung up was just all the starter teeth, probably sticking to the magnet, jamming things up. So I'm going to spend a second just to get all the pieces out that I can find. But I think that was the issue. So yeah, actually, the teeth may not have been jamming between the magnet and the starter. It's probably jammed up between the magnet and the coil. If that gets wedged in there just right, that can lock the engine up like it is right now. So yeah, thankfully good news. I have never had a bad Tecumseh engine. And this one, it's not bad. We just don't have electric start, which isn't a big deal. Now, as far as why is it loose, I think that's a better question. That's probably why the teeth got chewed up. So let's keep digging a little deeper. But I think it's just a matter of the bolts maybe loosened up. So the starter, most likely we can just replace the gear. And that might operate again. So it does look like the mounts took on a bit of damage. And surprisingly, the bolts aren't loose, which I find hard to believe, since they don't turn out, and they're definitely not tight. Hope I don't break it. All right, the bottom ones are not shoulder bolts. And they were also not tight. So the bottom bracket, it looks fine. Like we could reinstall that, tighten those bolts up. I don't think we'd have any issues with that. But the top got mangled pretty bad. So we can try to bend that back in shape. You know, as long as the ears don't break off, we can probably get away with reusing that. The other issue, which I think is what led to this failure, is that the Bendix appears to be stuck out. So if you were to start the engine, you know, this motor would just spin with the engine, and the Bendix should actually retract. And that's likely how all these teeth got broken off. So it could have also done some damage to the motor. So I do want to test that real quick, make sure that the motor's good. And if it is, we can look into, you know, what options we have to rebuild this and make it work again. All right, let's see if the actual motor works. Hit the button. Yeah, so no issues with the motor. So let's see if we can get the Bendix freed up. And I'm guessing we're going to have to pull this cap off. And there's probably a snap ring in there, which we can't actually access because the Bendix is stuck out. So let's get this mounted up in the vise. We're going to soak it with some penetrating oil. And we're going to try to tap this outer race on the Bendix to see if we can't get it to move a little bit. Well, that was easy. Okay, so that is fixed. Wasn't really that stuck. So this is the ring right here. If we remove that, then we can get, you know, the bad Bendix off. So I don't think we're going to have any issues with that. I guess we'll do that while we're here. And then we'll try to straighten up the bracket, see if that can be saved. All right, so the good news is we got the Bendix out. I was kind of worried about that. So that'll be easy enough to replace. As far as these tabs go, we just need to squeeze them in a little tighter. The shoulder bolt is just meant to kind of hold this in place. Not super tight. It's almost more like a locating pin. It's the bottom bolts that actually hold things still. And the bolt on the right was loose, and the one on the left was not a whole lot better. So, this hole actually looks like it might have been walled out a little bit. So I'm thinking when we put this back on, we're probably going to use some thread locker and maybe a lock washer. The other concerning thing too is that, just the vibration of this engine can cause these to back out and actually damage the threads. The one on the right seems to thread in pretty well. The one here on the left, I actually got about half a turn and now it's stuck. So I think we need to clean the threads up a bit, just make sure we have some good threads to work with. And, technically we don't even have to order the parts for this starter. We can actually set this aside for now because I do have another Snow King engine, which I kind of expected to use to fix the snowblower. This one I don't know anything about. It was dropped off by my friend Jason. This one was pulled from the trash. It is missing the starter cord and probably some other things, but it does have a starter. And, chances are that one still works. So we can just move that whole thing over to this machine over here. But I'm not going to worry about any of that for now. I think the priority is just getting the engine to fire up and make sure that the engine is 100%, that the auger works, that the drive system works. And if all the main components are working, then we can place an order and get everything else we need to get this thing 100%. So let's just clean up these threads real quick, make sure they're okay. And I'm going to turn our attention, I think, to the carburetor. We'll get that cleaned up so we can get this engine fired up and just validate where things are at. I think the bolt's okay. Let's just check the right side. Yeah, it threads right in. It feels pretty good. Like, it's not sloppy in the threads. It just threads in real easy. So without thread locker, I can see why that would have backed off over time, especially on a Tecumseh. They do like to shake and rattle. But yeah, it gets pretty tight after a turn or so on the left. So we'll run the tap through there. Try to clean it up. Yeah, and that's pretty good. I'm not going to run the tap all the way to the bottom because my tap tends to make the threads a little loose, and I want to make sure that this has something to bite into as it goes down. But as it is now, it starts easy, threads in fine. So I don't think we have any issues with mounting the starter. So despite what's coming out of that carburetor, I actually think it's going to be halfway decent. The outside of the carb isn't that dirty. Throttle plate and choke plate move quite well. But clearly it's been some time, I would say, since this engine ran. So I'm going to start just by getting this bracket off. And then we'll drop the bowl and see what we're dealing with. That wasn't on there that tight. And it's spinning out pretty well, so that's a good sign. And usually the buildup on the bowl nut is also a good indicator. In this case, it's pretty clean. And yeah, actually, carb looks pretty good. The bowl is virtually spotless. Needle is not stuck. Yeah, it actually looks pretty good. So this carb, I'm not sure actually if it's OEM. You know, Tecumsehs usually have a rubber seat, and this one has more of a Honda style needle. So yeah, it potentially may have been replaced at some point. And it looks like we're missing the plug right there. So I wouldn't say that's critical. It should run okay, but the point of that is to keep fuel from splashing up, which could kind of interfere with how the carb runs. So if we have run issues, you know, it might be due to that. Now, the emulsion tube, it is removable. Although in this case, I think I'm going to leave it in there. You know, we can clean it and just make sure that the passage is clear. Otherwise, though, it looks pretty good. You know, the main jet looks to be clear. But let's run through the passages. There's a tiny one right there, which that is for the pilot circuit. It clogs up very easily. So yeah, we'll run through everything, make sure it's clear. Soak this in the ultrasonic probably for 5 minutes, and I think we'll be good to go. And I almost forgot, there is a pilot jet under here. So it's just a plastic cap covering it up. And we might need some needle nose to get this off. But you do want to remove it and take that jet out and make sure it's clear. So I'm going to sink the float, just make sure it doesn't take on any fluid. I'm also not going to soak the needle because it has the neoprene rubber on it. And a lot of degreasers will shrink it or cause it to increase in size, and then it's not going to seal right. All right, so while that carb is cooking away, I'm going to clean this up a bit. WD-40 does a great job cleaning off this oily dirt mess. All right, so let's get this car back together. Cleaned up pretty well. It's been rinsed, so all the degreaser's off and blown dry. So let's start with the float needle. And we'll get the bowl on next. Make sure this line is aligned with the pin, like that. And lastly, we'll get the pilot back in place, as well as the bracket. So first thing, we want to get the governor reconnected. It was in that hole right there. And then we can get the fuel line in place. And bolt it down. I double checked. This Bosch plug does cross-reference to a Champion RJ19LM, which is the correct plug. So we're going to put it back in. The plug's actually in pretty good shape. So before we try starting this, I want to get the drive system working. And as far as I can tell, it does actually work. You know, this moves without issue. The problem is this bracket, it's not supposed to have a bend right there. And this bar is not supposed to be curved either. So I think, you know, in order to get this to work right, we're going to have to straighten the bracket, straighten this rod, and then I think we'll be able to shift into forward and reverse. Actually, I'm going to hold off on bending this. You know, it's hard to tell if that's a factory bend or something else. So let's straighten out that rod first and see if that fixes the issue with the speed selection. Doesn't have to be perfect, but that is quite a bit better. I guess the only thing I don't know is this supposed to be a 90? Because it's not quite. So let's try this as is. See if we can select a gear. So we'll get this nut on. I'm going to leave it loose because it's adjustable. And once we get it connected to the top, we can snug it down. All right, so right now we're in forward and we're all the way over. So I'm going to bring it to reverse. Yeah, and I'm not sure if we're actually there. We don't seem to have full range of motion. So we might have to take the belly pan off, but I think for now we should be able to test. You know, like this, we should have forward. All right, so it's the moment of truth. I'm going to run it off a two-stroke fuel, which you shouldn't do for an extended period. But given this hasn't run in at least 6 years, I want to make sure that, you know, the top end has a little bit of extra lubrication. So it looks like we are full of fuel. Needle and seat shut off. So let's try to start it. All right, so let's give this a try. We'll turn the choke on, ignition on, partial throttle, pump the primer, and let's try to start it. Let's try the choke open. A little bit more fuel, and we'll close the choke. not a good sign. You know, it feels like we do have compression. Not sure if we have fuel. Or potentially we're missing spark. So I'm going to get a little bit of starting fluid in there. That'll tell us pretty quickly if we're missing spark or fuel. All right, choke is closed. Let's try this again. Yeah, we might be missing spark. So let's get the spark tester on there. See if we have spark. Yeah, we don't have any spark. So this engine's pretty simple. There's only two ways to kill spark. One is by grounding out the coil like that, which we weren't doing. And the other way is this key right here. And you actually need to pick up a ground from the housing that we don't have right here. So, you know, even if this key was pulled right now, you know, this theoretically would kill spark, but without a source of ground, you know, this isn't going to do anything. So I'm thinking likely we do have a problem with the coil. So we need to get the blower housing back off. So we got to remove this governor and a few bolts. We'll get this back off and likely swap coils. Yeah, I do have another OEM Tecumseh coil. It might work. You know, it seems to be the same width and also for the same diameter flywheel. Obviously, the construction is different. You know, these holes are also slightly different. So we might not be able to gap the coil correctly, but if we can, you know, I think this one has a good chance of working. So let's try fitting this and we'll check again for spark. Yeah, this is going to work. So we have enough clearance for the coil. So we get a business card under there and just gap it to 0.010 of an inch. All right, let's give this a try. So choke's on, ignition is on. We'll give it one pump. Let's try to start it. All right, so that was a pretty good test. Now that we have a good coil in there, the engine started first pull, and it sounded really good. I was able to turn the choke off right away, so the carb is actually running it well. So as far as the engine and the carb goes, I think we're good. The drive system is also functioning, at least in forward gears. I couldn't actually get it into reverse, but I tried a fast forward gear as well as a slow one, and the wheels engaged, and I was able to hold it back, and the wheels kept spinning. So I think, the drive system is more or less good. Likely we are going to have to drop the belly pan and just grease the shaft to get this into reverse, but I'm not too worried about that. The auger also working, maybe a little bit too well, because it was spinning pretty much regardless of the position of this handle. And as far as I can tell, everything's working correctly. When I lift the handle up, the tensioner, it does go all the way back, and it's not engaging the belt. I can actually spin it without moving the crankshaft. So yeah, maybe this belt might be too tight, but given the condition of the pulley, I'm thinking it's likely just the rust providing enough friction to keep that auger spinning. Likely under load, it would not do anything. So I think if we clean up this pulley, likely that auger issue will be solved. But the good news is everything critical is working. The auger is working, the drive system's working, and the engine is working. So before we place a parts order, we really need to understand what all the parts are that we need. So, potentially we need a new pulley. To clean that up, we're going to have to actually split the snowblower and get the belt off to clean the pulley, and then of course try it out and see if that auger disengages. We also have a bunch of issues with the controls, so let's start here. Let's see which of these controls we can get working properly, and if not, at least get a parts list together so that we can get all of them functioning like they should. So starting here with the throw angle, moving this lever doesn't seem to do anything. But from looking underneath, I don't see any issues with the cables or the control. I think the issue here is just the spring. This is a return spring, and without it, this won't go up on its own. The cable only pulls it down, and if I move this to the down position, it functions properly. It just won't go back up without the spring. So that's an easy fix. We just need a new spring for that. As far as controlling the position left and right, again, the cables seem to be intact. I don't see any rust on them, and the control does move. But when doing that, we get absolutely no response. And the reason for that is because the cables underneath here, they've moved out of position. And like that, it can't control the left and right. So let's try to get those cables back where they belong and hopefully get this function restored. Yeah, so I'm not quite sure what happened here, but both these cables, they are connected like they should be. The issue is there seems to be a lot of extra cable up here, and it just came off of the track. So, even if we got this back in here, you can see we have an extra inch or two, and it's just going to come back out again. Same issue over here. So, I tend to think the issue might not be here. I mean, obviously we have to get these back where they go, but there shouldn't be that much extra length. So let's take a look at the other end. See if that gives us any clues. And just looking at where it connects to the chute here. So there's a few things I've noticed. I guess first off, we have an adjustment right here. You know, that might take away an inch or so of the slop, but that's it. You know, that's not going to be enough. And when looking under here, you know, it appears the cable is connected. You know, it's like that on both sides, but you can see how much extra cable there is. So I'm thinking potentially this should actually be connected maybe to the far side. And same thing with the other cable. Maybe they need to overlap. I'm not sure, but I think we need to start there. I'm also pretty sure that's not the original spring. I think someone was trying to fix this and maybe they had this apart and just put it back together wrong. So I don't think, you know, the change I'm going to make right now would have happened on its own. And actually, is this what we want to do? Yeah, I think it is. That's going to allow us to drop down the plastic piece that the cables are attached to. In theory, we might actually have to remove that bolt as well to get a little bit better access to it. Yeah, we need to pull this one as well. Yeah, I thought that might happen. So I think the issue here is that this belongs over there, like wrap around it a little bit. Yeah, so what I'm thinking is that this needs to go over there and vice versa. So I guess the question is, do we have enough cable to do that? Which it seems like we do. Huh. All right, so this piece, it goes in like that. Originally, this cable was attached here. And yeah, like that. Obviously, we have a lot of extra cable. And actually, the cable doesn't even bend all the way over. But if we go the other way, it does. So that tells me it was definitely, I think, put on wrong. You know, the question is, which way is right? Yeah, that actually looks pretty good right there. So can we do the same with the other one? Yep. And we're a little bit short. But I think this is the way it's supposed to be. So let me see if I can get any more cable length. And we don't need much, but we do need just a bit more. And this one's already adjusted pretty much all the way in. Yeah, see, that's going kind of the wrong way. Yeah, it's giving us less cable, so we'll drive that back in. And we do have some extra right there, so I'm wondering if we can maybe thread this all the way out. And we'll start the far one, then the close one. And hopefully we can get that to go in a little more. Yeah. That might make the difference. Let's see. Yeah, and with that adjustment, we're now where we need to be. Now, it is still kind of on the tight side, which you want it to be. You don't want it to be loose, otherwise the cable's going to come off. So I think we're okay. Although I say that, and I do want to move this just a little bit so that these aren't getting tangled here quite as much. Yeah, and now it actually fits better as well. So let's get this back on and see if we fixed it. Huh. This was the nut that was on here, but it seems to be stripped out. So maybe the wrong nut was on here? Yeah, I don't think that's the right one, because I can just push it on by hand. So very interesting. So I am going to get the right nut, probably metric, maybe an M12. Yeah, it's an M10 1.5. All right, so right there we're snug, and actually it still rotates just fine. So let's try the lever, see if it'll move. All right, so we know this works. I actually just moved the knob over to here because to get any of these controls to work, you actually have to push in and then move the lever. So without the knob, it kind of digs in and hurts a bit. So I've got the cables routed, I believe, in the correct spot. You know, everything's been tucked in, and what you see here is actually the same on the back side on the left. So that's been tucked in as well. So I believe we should be good to go here. You know, if we rotate to the right, it should spin clockwise, which it does, and to the left, counterclockwise. So that is fixed. This, we just need a spring. As far as I can tell, these controls are working. The triggers, though, we will test that. You know, they feel like they're working, but this one, the wheel's actually on backwards. So the way that it is right now, the left trigger would not function properly. So we'll take a closer look at that. And of course, we don't have reverse. So I think the next move here is to tilt this up and get the belly pan off and see if we can get reverse to function. All right, so to get the belly pan off, we have two bolts down here. One's already missing, and a bolt on each side here. So we'll get those off, and hopefully there's no surprises in here. You know, usually mice move into these and rot them out, but this one feels pretty solid. Yeah, it actually looks pretty clean in here. So this is the gear selector right here. And on the right side of the disc, that's forward. And on the left side, that's reverse. So we can't go into reverse. And the shaft is pretty dry here. So thinking we just need a little bit of lubrication. So I'm going to move it actually all the way forward to get this out of the way. Yeah, we'll clean this up maybe with some Scotch-Brite, put some grease on it, and then see if we can move it into the reverse direction. And I'm going to put a rag down here because we're going to probably drip a little bit of oil. We don't want any of that on the plate. Otherwise, it's going to slip when trying to drive. And we'll just use a bit of Scotch-Brite. WD-40 will get that shaft cleaned, greased up, and while we're here, we'll get some grease on these gears as well. That felt like we went in reverse, although I guess that towel might have hung things up. And no, we're not quite there, but it looks like it will go. So let me try it again. Yeah, we're getting hung up on something here. So, I mean, it seems to move freely. I think the issue is actually the shift linkage. You know, that adjustment we made earlier might be limiting how far we can move this, but it looks like it should move. I just can't move it any further. You know, the linkage up here seems to be maxed out, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But yeah, the tension seems to be right here. So let's break that bolt loose and we'll make some adjustments to give us a little bit more throw. All right, so now that the shaft is out, I think I see what's going on here. You know, this turns just fine, has full range of motion, but when I put the shaft in and hold it, you know, pointing up to the control lever, it goes part way and then it binds, and it's actually binding right here. So this piece, I would say, is not a factory bend, and that's what's causing us the problem right now. So we need to get this bolt out, try to straighten this out. Otherwise, we're going to need a new one of those. So I believe this piece needs to be parallel with the other piece right there. So we could try to just muscle it back and, you know, this would work. My only concern is the welds. I'm not sure how strong they are. So instead, I'm going to heat the part up. We'll try to get it glowing red. Then we'll try to true it up within reason. You know, I think it probably doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as we can get it pretty close, I think that'll correct the problem. Yeah, good enough. All right, let's see if we get full range of motion. Right now we're in forward. Yeah, and we're in reverse now. So the control moves fully in each direction. So that problem's fixed. So I'm just getting a very thin layer of grease on here just to help things move. You know, in this case, this wasn't the issue, but it very well could have been, you know, if this had rusted up. So I'm going to move this disc over to the right, and we'll just grease the other side of the shaft. And we'll do the same to the gears. And the temptation is to go heavy on the grease here, but you really can't. Because if that flies off and lands on the friction disc, things aren't going to move. Now I am noticing the shift fork does have some damage here. I noticed when we slide this over, before we made the adjustment, it was actually rubbing, I think, against this wheel right here with the rubber on it. So the way I have it set right now, it's not going to wear on that anymore, but obviously, you know, that is weakened and at some point might become an issue. So while we have it up in the air, let's test these triggers. Yeah, I know the other wheel is on backwards, so that trigger's not going to work. I guess the question is it broken or did the wheel just get put on the wrong way? But this wheel is correct. The valve stem's facing out. Everything appears normal, and right now it is engaged with the axle. But when we hold the trigger down, you know, that should freewheel. So without the trigger down, functions as normal. Now I'm going to press the trigger, and this wheel freewheels like it should. So the trigger's back up, and it's engaged. So let's check out the other side. And the other side, I can tell you right now, is not going to work because the rim, it's pinned to the axle. So that may have been done on purpose, but I have a feeling it was an accident. So right now, obviously, both wheels spin. If I hold the trigger down, both wheels continue to spin. So let's pull this pin, put the wheel on the correct way. That. And right now both wheels spin. Let's try the trigger. Yeah, so it's actually functioning properly. For some reason, it was just put on the wrong way. So let's get the pin reinstalled. Belly pan back on, and I think we're done under here. And as mentioned earlier, we need new shoes. This one's completely worn out. The other side is paper thin. And scraper definitely have seen better days. It's actually starting to wear the bucket. You know, that might have happened previously, but you can see there's not a lot of metal left to hold on to that scraper. So, you know, the bolts, they're actually starting to wear as well. So it's best to get a new scraper on there now before there's not enough metal left to hold on to it. And the reason we were missing a bolt is because we were missing one of these. So without that, there's no threads for the bolt to hang on to. But luckily I have one that I think will do the trick. So the controls, they are more or less squared away at this point. We just need the new spring and we'll be fully functional. The wheels are all set. Obviously we need a scraper and some new shoes. You know, the thing that concerns me, or I guess the last thing really, is what's going on with the auger and why it's not disengaging. So ideally, I would just remove this bolt from the pulley, which is screwed into the crankshaft, slide the pulley off, clean it up, or replace it. But it might be rusted on there. So we won't know till we try. So let's get the bolt out and see if that pulley will come off the crankshaft. So what do you think? Did the factory put some anti-seize on here? Oh, look at that. That never happens. So that is good news. That shaft is nice and clean. So we will get some anti-seize on there before we put this back together. The pulley isn't terrible, and I say that, you know, it's not great either, but the sidewalls are actually not rusted. It's just the bottom, which the belt doesn't actually touch, and kind of the upper area, which again, the belt doesn't touch. So we might be getting a new belt and a new pulley. But it can't hurt to try to fix this one. It's probably way too much. All right, so I've got some anti-seize on the shaft just in case this works. You know, even though most of the rust has been removed, it is still pretty rough, so I'm not convinced that this is going to work. I guess we need to put the belt on first. Then the pulley. And we'll get the bolt back in. I don't have a torque spec on this, but it wasn't that tight. So we'll just snug it up And I think we'll get the blower restarted. I want to test all the functions and the controls and see if the auger has stopped spinning. All right, so now that we're back together, let's try this again. I want to make sure we have reverse, and hopefully that auger is no longer spinning. So choke's on, ignition's on, we'll give it a little prime. So we're partially successful here. We now have forward and reverse, but the auger continues to spin. So I'm not sure if it's the belt or the pulley. Regardless, though, the pulley's not in great shape. We should replace it, and the belt as well. Now, I did notice potentially another problem. The gearbox was kind of moving back and forth, and that suggests that something might be bent, although I didn't see it. And it was moving very slowly. So I don't think it was the high-speed impeller. If anything would be bent, it would be, these tines right here on either side. But they did not look bent when spinning. So my best guess is that we might have an issue with the bushing here on one of the ends. And that's just causing things to shift as the auger rotates. So I think we need to get those out and inspect them for damage. So I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to see here without taking the bucket off. But I'm hoping we can see enough to at least know what the problem is. Yeah, I don't see a problem over here. The bearing actually feels good. And the other side, there's a piece of plastic, but I don't think that does a whole lot. I think this is doing most of the work. So I guess we'll get this back in and check the other side. Yeah, no issues here. This bearing actually feels good too. So, yeah, I'm not sure what the issue is. I mean, some movement's normal, but that seemed a little bit excessive. Anyway, let's get this one back in. So yeah, I'm not sure what to think about this one. I mean, the bearings are in good shape. These bushings also seem to be fine. But there is play in the system. And, some play is normal. I'm just wondering if it's excessive or not. I guess the fact that the auger is actually scraping the table probably isn't helping. So I'm thinking, that contact likely has something to do with the excessive movement we're seeing. But as far as I can tell, the bushings and the bearings are fine, and nothing appears to be bent. All right, so the parts have been ordered. It's actually a few days later, and the parts are starting to show up. So far we have the light and the new knobs, and a few other parts are due in later today. So let's get the stuff installed that we have. There's a few other things we can do to kind of get ready for the other parts. And hopefully by the time we're done that, the rest of the parts will be here. All right, so we're going to start easy here and just get the missing knob in place. Now, we only needed one, but it was a pack of 5 for $10. So I got that. We can replace this one as well. And I guess ideally I'd replace the other one over here, but I'm pretty sure it's a different thread. But we'll try it just in case. Oh, it's actually the same thread. Very nice. Yeah, let's get this old light off. Now the OEM light, I did not buy. Actually, most of the parts I bought were not OEM. Just to save on money. Yeah, I think the total cost was going to be about $200, maybe $250 OEM. And aftermarket, quite a bit less, just over $100. And this light being a perfect example because the OEM light, most sites wanted about $75 and a few of them wanted over $100. So instead, I found this light, which is a standard light, part or light number 889. It's only 27 watts. I wasn't completely sure how strong the stator was. They do make this in the same form factor, higher wattage, but I thought 27 likely is a safe bet, assuming it fits, which I think it will. Yeah, that's perfect. So let's fit it and maybe get the engine started. Let's make sure that the system that generates power actually works on this machine. All right, let's try this real quick. Make sure the light works. So we are refueled, choke is on, ignition's on, give it a little prime. A little bit more fuel. Okay, the light seems to work. All right, so we're looking pretty good for the light and the knobs. I think I want to remove these. This actually would have been for like an optional enclosure or cab that goes over the operator just to keep the snow out of their face. You know, I don't have that enclosure and these things are looking pretty rusty. So yeah, let's get those removed and then I'm going to move on. You know, I want to see if we can actually fix the starter so that it mounts properly. You know, I don't have the Bendix yet, but we can bend those tabs and just see if that starter has any chance of fitting back in here. And I think I'm going to do the same down here. I don't have the new shoes or scraper yet, but some of this hardware is pretty crusty. So let's get it off now and just make sure there's no surprises. You know, obviously we're going to need some new nuts and bolts to secure the new stuff once it arrives. So for now, I'm not too worried about saving this old stuff. We just need to remove it from the machine. As far as getting the scraper out, I'm hoping that these are carriage bolts, because there's really not a great way to get a flathead screwdriver on there to keep them from spinning. So we might actually need to cut them out, potentially drill them out. Either way, I think the way to go here is to tip this back up in the service position, and we'll try spinning the nuts on the back side, but they are pretty rusty and pretty worn, so I think it's unlikely that they're just going to come out without cutting them off. No, it's just spinning on the back side. Yeah, same thing with that one. So I think the best bet here is to probably drill out the center to release that scraper. So I am a little hesitant to use this starter. I might end up using the one from the other machine. The main reason is that I'm not sure if I can get these locating tabs in the right spot. Down here, might be a little egged out, but actually doesn't look too bad. Anyway, the tabs on the left appear to be positioned perfectly. It's just the tabs on the right that have moved out of place. So I'm going to try to use the vise to bend just the tabs here on the right, and we'll see how that goes. All right, it moved a little bit. Let's try the other one. And this one is severely deformed. And we might actually be missing a piece. So yeah, I'm not too optimistic about this. Yeah, that might actually work. Yeah, it's supposed to be slotted so you can slide the starter in place, and with the way they're bent right now, actually it looks like this one can still slide in, but the other one can't. It's actually kind of locked in, which might not be a bad thing, although there is still a bit of slop in there, so I'm not sure how critical that is. So I might squeeze that a little tighter and push my luck. Yeah, I think that'll do. So let's try fitting it to the machine and check the alignment. Well, it's nice and secure. Yeah, it's really hard to know if the alignment is good enough until we get that Bendix, which is due in later today. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. It's a lot better than what it was. So I'm going to get this back off, and when the new Bendix comes, we'll finish this up and try it out. Yeah, I think next we'll get the oil drained out. Although it looked pretty clean, we don't know the quality or the grade of that oil. This machine's going to be running in some pretty low temps, and if there's a heavy grade oil in there, like 30 weight or 10W40, then it's not going to do the engine any good. So let's pull the drain cap. We'll get all that out, fill it back up with some known good. All right, so we'll get the cap back on. According to Google, this takes about 26 to 28 ounces of oil. So start with 26, and we'll see where we're at on the dipstick. Also, this is a new camera, so should be about the same quality as the old one, but might be a little bit better. Let me know. Yeah, and we're right at the full line. So 26 ounces for the win. Yeah, it looks a little more used than I thought, but no metal in the oil, so that is a good sign. Let's just see how overfilled this was. Now, generally, you don't want to overfill an engine. It's going to cause problems. You know, a little bit overfilled is fine. And in this case, we were over a liter. We're at about 32 ounces. So, yeah, a little bit over full, but, you know, it was pretty close. So, likely that would not have caused an issue. So, while the oil was draining out, a couple packages did arrive. The first one should be the Bendix gear. Not the OEM part, but still a good brand. I think it was DB Electrical was the name of the company. And interesting. They sent the wrong part. So we don't have the Bendix, and this should be the belt, but we don't have the pulley. Interesting. So, you know, I was hoping the belt would look like this. Definitely the wrong belt on the machine. Let's go over there and take a look. So if you notice, the drive belt, the top of the belt is right at the top of the pulley, and the auger belt, that belt is at the bottom of the pulley. So it looks like the belt was too narrow, but I wasn't sure. You know, the parts diagram didn't have the dimensions of the belt, but now that the new belt is here with the correct part number, I think you can see it is wider. And because of that, it's going to sit higher on the pulley and likely solve the problem where the auger will not disengage. So yeah, we probably didn't need a new pulley. It's still a few days away, but when it arrives, we'll get the pulley on, we'll get the correct belt on, and that issue should be solved. And I'm pretty sure we're done in here, so I'm going to get the side cover back on. Just starting with the choke control. And then we have to connect up the switch. And then finally we can put the cover in place. And that brings us back to the belt. So I was avoiding doing this now. I mean, ideally, I'd do both at the same time. You know, I just don't want to have to split this machine twice. And I don't think we need to. You know, as we saw earlier, I could swap out the pulley without splitting the machine. But I can't swap the belt out the same way because the big pulley on the bottom here, it actually retains the belt. There is a metal bar going across the bottom, so the belt physically cannot be removed while the machine is together. So luckily, you know, it is easy enough to split, just one bolt on the top on each side. And once those are removed, the machine's going to pivot right there and open up, and we can separate the two halves. So before doing that, we do need to support this side. So in my case, I'm just going to get this off the lift. We'll rest the handles on the corner of the lift, and then we'll pull those bolts and hopefully get the old belt on and get the new one in its place. And we do need to remove this chute again. Not the cables though, but just the bracket. And then we can set this out of the way, because the bottom, it's attached to the blower. And the top, it's attached to the engine side of things, so you can't split it with this in place. Yeah, not only is the belt the wrong diameter, but if I align them on this side, pull them tight, it's the wrong length as well. Just going to make sure we don't pinch it. The other end of the tensioner, it's actually like a scrub brake to keep the auger from spinning when you remove the tension. So I think we're well positioned. I'm just going to get this a little bit better situated, although I guess I should find the nuts that fell in there. I think there's another one. I can just see it under the pulley. Yeah, I don't quite understand this. You know, the nut was right here. And if we put the bolt in there to tighten it, then, I mean, we're kind of pinning it in place, but it's not really tightening it. So maybe there was another nut behind it. Not sure. Yeah, I ended up taking the blower off. Things weren't making a whole lot of sense as far as why this nut was where it was. You know, like that, it's not really doing a whole lot other than giving the bolt a place to go. And technically, it is kind of locking the blower in place, but it's not really clamping down on it. And that is not really how it was designed. So I started to scrounge around and did find this also in the bottom of the machine. So I think this is what was originally used to clamp down. And, you know, I would say the weld broke, although the more I look at it, you know, I don't think that is a factory weld. I think someone was just trying to make reassembly a little bit easier by welding that in place. And, you know, it just wasn't a good weld. So, you know, I'm tempted to weld that back on, but I don't think it's really necessary. You know, if anything, I'm just going to clean up some of these booger welds, and when we put it back together, we'll just hold this in place and screw the bolt in. But that doesn't really fix this problem because, you know, as it is, it's not really doing a whole lot. And if I put it on the back side, you know, there's just some of these bad welds here that really serve no purpose. I think what they were trying to do was weld the nut in place. You know, if I turn it just right, it goes right in. The problem was the weld just was too cold and isn't holding it. So, you know, we could try to improve on that. You know, otherwise, all we need is something a little bit bigger on the back side so it doesn't pull through. So even like a piece of flat bar cut to size with a hole in it about 3/8 in diameter is really all we need to fix this issue. But I think regardless, we need to grind off these welds on both sides, and then we can try to get this back together and clamped to the machine properly. All right, so we cleaned up the factory nut. The welds are gone from it and was able to remove most of the weld as well. So like that, this will sit pretty flat and we can bolt to it. And what I did over here was just cut a little piece of flat bar off and welded a nut. Not very pretty, but welded a nut on there to make the installation a little bit easier. So like that, it essentially serves the same purpose as the factory fastener. So let's get the bucket back on. few more days have passed, and I think we finally have the parts we need. We've got the new pulley, the return spring for the chute, the Bendix gear, and a new set of shoes. Not to mention we have a brand new scraper. Now, technically, we probably could have reused this one. It is reversible, but it's too late now. We've got the new scraper, so let's get this stuff on and finish it up. All right, let's get this back together, starting with the gear. Seems to be a good fit. Not an OEM part. I think I went with a Stens part, but it should do the trick. So this cap, it does have a groove machined in it, and the corresponding one here is on the shaft. So once we put this in place and add this clip and bend it roughly back to round, we should be able to lock it in. Assuming we can get the clip on without parts flying everywhere. All right, that should be good. And the last piece of the puzzle here is the cap. Interesting. So the aftermarket part doesn't really fit the cap like the OEM part. So that's a little disappointing. You would have thought that they would have checked that. You know, at the end of the day, is it a big deal? Yeah, it could be. I mean, this keeps water out of this area and actually helps the Bendix gear from getting locked up. So let me see if I can find anything that will fit onto this gear. So we'll get the starter back in. And I was not able to come up with any better options for that cap. So, you know, a lot of starters don't have that, but it is a nice feature to offer a bit of protection. So probably should have gone with OEM. So now that we have the starter on, let's try it out. Let's make sure it works. And it would also be a good time to test that belt as well. So when the engine starts, if this is the correct belt, that auger should not spin until I depress the handle. So we'll test that as well. But for now, let's just start it with the auger off, and hopefully we don't see it spin. So choke is on, ignition's on, we'll give it a little fuel contact. All right, so those issues are sorted, and I think we can finish this up. So let's get this spring on. And we got to get the old one off first. Definitely not the right part. So we'll set that aside. And this one, I believe, should go something like this. Although we're kind of missing something over here. So this bolt, I think, should be reversed so that the long part of the bolt is sticking up. And then I believe we can just double nut it to clamp it in place. So let's loosen this up, actually remove the nut altogether. We'll flip it around and get the spring attached. Well, I see a couple problems here. First off, the cable doesn't seem to have enough throw to actually bend it down. And the second problem is the spring doesn't quite have enough spring, although I guess technically the snow blowing will be enough to bump it up, and then the spring can hold it there. So I guess that's probably not critical. But this cable, yeah, it doesn't have enough throw. So maybe there's an adjustment on that. Otherwise, an easy fix is we can move the actual bracket further down. But yeah, let's look around first, see if we can adjust it. So unfortunately, after looking around, there does not seem to be an adjustment for this cable. But as it is right now, it looks like it's too long. So maybe someone put the wrong cable on here at some point. Because to make this cable work, this bracket would have to be further down on the chute. Like right about there. So now all the slop is out of the cable and the control would fully bend this down. So, that I guess is an option. I mean, technically we could drill a hole right there. Otherwise, we might be able to put it on a different way, although that doesn't seem like it'll offer us much assistance, nor that. So yeah, unfortunately, I think we need a new cable for the chute. So not a big deal other than the fact that I've got to order it, and it's going to take a few more days to arrive. So let's finish up putting on all the other parts and make sure that everything else is good. Yeah, now that that scraper's on, you know, things look pretty good right up until maybe the last couple inches. The scraper actually kind of curves up a bit. So, I mean, ideally that would be all the same level, but there's really no adjustment in it. You know, despite the fact that it's slotted, you know, it's already maxed out. So, yeah, I think we're going to have to call that good enough. It just means when we set the shoe height, we don't want to set the gap right here. We probably want to put a 3/16 inch space right there, as well as the other side. And this side will be a little bit higher than the rest of the machine. And I'm just going to use a couple paint sticks to set that gap to about 3/16 of an inch. And we finally have what I hope is the final piece of the puzzle. This is a new aftermarket cable that hopefully will take care of this problem. We've got the new cable on the top and the old here on the bottom, and they're pulled out as far as they go. And I think you can see the difference here that the new one, it is shorter. Not quite as short as I was hoping, but that should help improve the situation. So let's get it installed and see if this fixes our problem. Well, I think we're pretty much as ready as we're going to be. You know, it is mid-January, and there is currently no snow in the forecast, but there is still plenty of time. So we'll give it a few weeks, and with any luck, we can try this machine out. Well, it's only a few days later, and this was not on the forecast, but we got snow. Actually, it was snowing kind of on and off pretty much the whole day yesterday. Yeah, I think we got a good 4 or 5 inches, and it's still snowing right now. It's actually the next day, and we're going to get another 3 to 5 over the course of the day. It's actually not going to stop until the sun sets, which is a good 8 hours from now. So, you know, the snow has let up a little bit, so I think now is a good time to try the machine out and make sure it's up to the task. Well, for the most part, the machine worked quite well. And when you consider, where we started with a locked up engine, a bunch of controls that didn't work, and a lot of other maintenance things we had to do along the way, this is now a viable and usable machine. That said, though, it is not perfect. And now that I put it to work, I did find at least 2 more issues I want to deal with. And maybe we'll get to try it out later when we get another 3 to 5 inches of snow. The first issue was this wheel right here. Although it was working, occasionally it was acting like someone was hitting the trigger. And when that happened, the wheel would disengage from the axle and the whole machine would turn to the left. So, that was a bit of a nuisance and could be problematic, when going along closely to something like your car. If that wheel disengages and it turns into the car, then you're going to have a bad day. So I think at a minimum, we should get this back up on the lift, pull the wheel, see if we can figure out what the issue is. If we're lucky, we can fix it. Otherwise, we can get a parts list together and just turn the wheel around for now. The bigger issue, in my opinion, is actually the engine speed. Although it started normally, it didn't stay that way. Under load, it seemed to bog a little bit excessively. And more concerning is that once the engine warmed up and I took the load off, the engine was definitely over revving. I had to bump that throttle down a few times just to keep the speed under control. So I do want to pull this tin, take a closer look at the governor setup and see if there's anything we can correct there so that the engine maintains its speed better. So I'm going to get this back inside. We'll let the snow melt off. We'll dig into these 2 issues, and later this evening, we'll bring it back out, see if there's any improvement. So I theorize that the cable might be to blame here. The trigger's not depressed, and there is still a bit of tension down here, so it's possible it's not fully engaging and just causing it to slip. So we'll just get this cover off. Looks like one more on the bottom, and that should expose all the gears behind there. Yeah, things actually look pretty good in here. I was thinking that this wasn't engaging all the way. But it seems like it is. So potentially the cable was hung up a little bit outside. Because it was acting like, normal. And then every once in a while you'd feel it jump. And then lock back in just like that. And I honestly don't see how it could do that. The spring seems to work fine. And it's fully locked in place. So, yeah, I think for now, I'm just going to keep an eye on it. Potentially the cable was holding things a little bit tight so that things were locked in, but not enough. That would allow it to potentially jump and then lock in again. But the way it is now actually looks pretty good. Yeah, I'm not seeing an issue here with the governor setup. You know, sometimes these rods can rub against the intake manifold. And this one is just a bit, but I don't think that's enough to influence, you know, the engine speed like we were seeing. So I think what I'm going to do for now is just reset the governor calibration, and we'll try it again, see if that corrects the issue. All right, so it's pretty hard to get you in here, but what you want to do is move this to full throttle. And that will tell you which way the governor arm has to move to get to full throttle. And you want to hold the arm in that position, which in this case is toward the front of the machine. And you want to loosen that bolt right there, and also rotate the governor shaft clockwise. And then just tighten up that bolt again, and the adjustment's complete. Okay, it did actually move a little bit. This is a pivot point right here. So the governor shaft wasn't fully clockwise against the internal governor when the throttle plate was at wide open throttle. So like that, the engine could definitely have issues slowing down. So yeah, we'll give that a go. So I'm going to get this back together, and I'll meet you outside once we get a bit more snow. Well, the snow is done, and we did not get the 3 to 5 inches they were calling for. So we got maybe an inch at best, but I still think it's worth running up and down the driveway a few times just to see if the governor has a little bit better control of the engine speed, and see if there's any improvement on that left drive wheel. Well, we're definitely making progress here. So the engine bogging and over revving definitely fixed. This time, regardless of whether it was under load or not, that engine speed stayed rock solid steady. So that adjustment we made on the governor definitely fixed that issue. And no surprise, the wheel still doing the same thing, although this time I did recognize a bit of a pattern. It seems like about every 4 or 5 paces I take behind the machine, the wheel skips a tooth. At least that's what I think is happening. So I'm going to actually pull the wheel off. We'll pull off that dust cover, and we'll just engage the drive system and see if we can catch it in the act, just to make sure it is what I think it is. So hopefully you guys could see what was going on. It was a little bit hard for me to see, but from what I could tell, the gears were not disengaging when that wheel was slipping. And it almost looked like the entire axle on that side was slowing down, which I don't think makes a lot of sense. This axle, I believe, is straight through from one side to the other. So what I've done is reverse the wheel. And I've got it staked onto the axle. And I'm going to drive it through some deeper snow. I want to see that that wheel stays engaged and that, of course, the engine continues to run smooth. You know, that it doesn't bog down with that deep, heavier snow on the side here. So, yeah, let's try it out. All right, guys, I think I'm going to call it on this one. You know, I'm still pretty happy with the governor response now. I had no issues going through the heavy, deep snow. Engine speed remained very stable. And turning that wheel around made a big difference. This machine is a lot more usable like that. You know, ideally, we'd fix the issue with the trigger system, but yeah, it's not clear to me what part is broken. So until it is, you know, I'm going to leave good enough alone. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.